Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 8. This is Joshua Womboy, your host. We're doing amazing stories. We're sharing amazing stories of people who are doing amazing things. And this is episode 8, meaning we are having 8 stories of huge stories of people who are doing great things. And not only in Kenya, but Africa in general. And that's my goal, actually, to really share inspiring stories. And I hope at the end of it, I impact somebody's life and you get to learn something. So today we have Tom Osborn, who we met in high school back in 2014. He graduated or he completed high school in 2013. Yeah, that was 1 year ahead of me. That's when we met. So just to introduce you, Tom, I think I have an interesting way that maybe I would ask you to introduce yourself. So imagine if you met Elon Musk from SpaceX, of course. Then you have a minute, or just, let me give you 2 minutes to say who you are and what you do. How would you pitch that in case you had
Why
something?
why Elon Musk?
I thought of somebody who, I don't know, maybe you're interested in space, maybe, and you want to. Anyway, just let
well,
me.
well, yeah, okay, that makes sense. It wouldn't be Elon Musk though, but that said, my name is Tom Osborn. Born and raised in Kenya. I graduated Alliance High School class of 2013. After I spent 3 years running a clean energy company called GreenChar, raised $300,000 for it, grew to a team of like 20, 25 people, about 2,000 clients, and then left in 2016 to go to Harvard, where I graduated in 2020 with a degree in psychology. Though I studied so many things that it was just really hard to figure out what to eventually have on my degree. Right now, I am running a data-driven nonprofit called Shamiri.
Yeah.
Our mission at Shamir is to develop and disseminate tools that allow young people in Kenya and other similar sub-Saharan African countries to really actualize their life outcomes. Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's huge, and captures almost everything, which is awesome. You did mention that, of course, as I had introduced earlier, that you went to Alliance High School. I've been seeing most of the people, and I've been trying to get people's perspective on what impact the high school they went to actually had on them. And yesterday, I was doing an interview with the current Miss Africa, who won just a month ago. And then the question I had was, how did high school impact you? And you going to Alliance High School, what impact was that on you? Or what do you do you think that was an important part in your life? What was the impact Alliance High School had on you?
That is a really interesting question. I think Alliance High School, like not only just Alliance High School, but high school in general is a really formative period for a lot of reasons. One,
Mhm.
well, we go through high school during adolescence, which is perhaps one of the most like important transitional phases in our life when we are really starting to grapple with important questions around identity or place in the world, existence, etc. And so it is really important to be able to go through this really important phase in a really nurturing and supportive environment, which I'm not saying Alliance was, but basically what I mean is just in an environment that allows you to really, be able to become a better person when you graduate. So I think, my story to a lot of extent is not possible without Alliance.
Yeah, true.
I have done a considerable amount of things in the last 10, 15 years, but whenever I ask my mom what my biggest accomplishment is, she normally says it's
Mhm.
just going to Alliance.
Yeah.
And I think it was because I think three things happened to me, which I think have really helped me along ever since. One, Alliance, I realized very quickly and very early on that, I was no longer, a big fish in a small pond. Like, you come to Alliance, there's all these smart kids from all over the country.
Sure.
You realize very quickly in the exams, you can no longer be number one, you can no longer be number two, you can no longer be number three.
Mhm.
And that requires some sort of like adapting or adjusting, etc. The second thing is, I think the people, I'd say the people, and I mean both students and teachers, were really important. So from a student perspective, I met friends who were ambitious, had big dreams for the world. Some of them who have worked with in projects before, but who just like inspired me in small conversations in the class, in the dorms, and extracurricular activities to want to dream big and think big, and I'm so grateful to have had that. And also teachers who were really helpful in kind of like showing me what is possible beyond that. And the third and final is just growth. I think that the kind of growth that I went through in high school allowed me to become more independent and more able to kind of stand on my own in a way that has been really useful since I graduated.
Well, awesome. I really would agree with what you've just said. I think it's a period of growth in high school where you were, my experience really was, these were 4 years of growth, like extreme growth. Because by then I come from like a quite an humble place from primary school, and then me transitioning to high school kind of immediately opened my eyes, and I had to like quickly adapt, quickly grow, quickly being exposed to like a lot of things, and that I think that was a key part in my life. So you left in 2014 for Harvard, which is I think a dream school for everybody. In the time that you were in Harvard, how was your experience? I know this is not specific, but then how would you say your experience was actually?
Like more generally, or like after graduating?
Just generally, and during the time you spent at Harvard.
I see. Yeah, I think while Alliance gave me an idea of how big and vast the world was, and just to think big, I think at Harvard I learned how to really narrow down on the big thoughts and the big ideas that I was having. So to more concretely mean is I learned the concrete tools and skills and steps that you really need to work on a project or work on an idea or work on anything that you want. I really learned besides that, like a lot of like independent critical thinking skills. I really, also learned, some sort of personal discipline that I think I didn't get previously before this. I think, for example, like my discipline previously was mostly extrinsic. There had to be like, external factors that were making me disciplined. For example, KCSE,
Yeah.
being disciplined if you don't wake up at 4 a.m., 4:45 a.m., etc.
Sure.
But none of those kind of like external forces were that Harvard. And so like if you were to do anything, you had to develop some sort of like internal discipline and just internal perseverance, which I think has really helped me. Yeah.
Oh, cool. I've had an experience of the European side, and I think I wouldn't generalize really, but then my Hungarian experience with studying as a student, I think it's quite a friendly place. I went to a town called Page, which is mostly I think the southern part of Hungary, and it was I think the people are friendly. It was quite a good environment to study, and I'm mostly interested to know how student friendly is Harvard and how student friendly is the US generally. I know we have had cases where we have extreme views on Black people actually. So during your experience, how did you see it, or did you have any major experiences that you would want to highlight today?
Yes, I think that's a good question, and it's so funny because like I've been thinking a lot about the term like school friendly, youth friendly, etc., student friendly. I mean, and it's a term that's kind of really hard to define. So and so I think like I will be best positioned to answer your question if I do have a much more concrete understanding of what you mean by student friendly. Does it mean an environment that's easier for students to be in? Does it mean kind of like a low student teacher ratio? You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
So as a student, rather, you have the interactions with other students, you have interaction with people outside when, let me say, if you're staying in campus or if you're staying in a dorm, then you have to go out, buy some stuff outside. So while interacting with other people, and mostly I'm interested on the black to white interactions. How was it? Did you get neutral? Did you get a neutral impact, or how did they see you? Because I know we have had cases where people experience like you're treated differently, you're viewed differently. So this is not more to the academic side, but then on the social part where you are interacting with the community generally.
I see what you're saying. Yes. So I think kind of like on the Black Lives Matter movement,
Mhm,
as well as just on race and race relationships amongst the student body.
mhm,
So and I can only obviously speak about my experiences. I think I was to one extent lucky to go to a really liberal school in a really liberal state.
yep, yep.
And so the consequence of that is normally you're not, exposed to overt or just like explicit racism, etc. It tends to be kind of more primarily like implicit. And I think, in all honesty, I think having been brought and raised up in Kenya,
Yep.
I think I, unlike my Black American friends, just did not have the same antenna for like implicit racism as it did. So to give you an illustration, like let's say you are in a computer science class because you studied, I think you studied computer science,
Yeah.
and it is a white professor who's leading the computer science class, and the white professor makes a statement, comes to you and tells you that, just encouraging that, like they're there for you, if you're struggling, you can come to them, you can go for like extra office hours, get extra support, etc.
Mhm.
One way of seeing it, which I did see, was kind of just like an unintentional, plea for, unintentional like offer for support. Whereas, it is possible for some of my Black American friends to be like, why is this white professor more specifically telling me this as a Black man? Is it associated with like the racial stereotype that, Black people, and to some extent, as the stereotype goes, inferior in the STEM, and so that kind of interaction, almost all interactions, become racialized, become seen from like, kind of a lens of race and racism. And I think that is something that you cannot avoid if you're born and raised in the US, because your entire existence as a person of color revolves around these like, social, cultural structures, which to a lot of extent are dependent on race and racism. Coming from Kenya, less so, right? So yeah, so that's kind of just one caveat as I talk about my personal experiences.
Mhm.
So in terms of kind of student friendliness, like I don't think that, I had any, once again, like any
Mhm.
explicit interaction that made me, kind of just question my place and my position
Mhm.
in the US from a racialized perspective. But I am sure there must be so many of these kind of implicit moments that I might have missed, or just missed, like, like on the spur of the moment.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so kind of more broadly, when the entire Black Lives Matter movement was kind of spiraling, it kind of spiraled once I had graduated college. So I never really got to experience a spiral when I was still a student. But I do know that there was, or there seemed to be, a divide in the reaction between, Black Americans and, Black people from Africa who are in America, in terms of like how they reacted to that. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. That's really good to get your perspective as well. I know if we had more time, we would dive into that. But I want to switch perspective into your passion for Africa, and I read a part where you're saying that those closest to the problem are the closest to the solution, and that's a term I was really interested in. I know before you went to Harvard, you were on the Forbes magazine among the top 30 under 30 social entrepreneurs with the startup that you had, that's GreenChar, and at the moment you said you are working for Shamiri, which is another a group that is focusing on mental health. We'll talk about that. But then, what did you really mean by those closest to the problem are the closest to the solution? And that has to do, I don't know, I don't know if there's a connection, but maybe you would highlight for us with you coming back to Africa and Kenya to run these projects. Does that have a connection with
Yes,
the
yeah.
statement?
I think the phrase, kind of comes from this idea or this belief that we need to turn upside down the current systems and ways of solving problems.
Mhm.
The systems tend to be really top down.
Yeah.
You tend to have like quote unquote experts who, are the ones who are trying to tell people what to do, sometimes in communities where they don't know a lot about.
That's true.
And the idea is that is great, but that is not the answer. And if you look at 20, 30, 40 years of like international development, of international development, non-profit, social enterprises, like wherever the new iteration is, they've all kind of, in my opinion, catastrophically failed because they've all just never fully embraced this idea that the people who are closest to the problem are better at developing a solution. So the key then, and which is kind of my driving principle, is we need to empower, we need to provide people who are close to the problem.
Yeah.
We need to provide them with the toolkits, the support, and the resources that they need to succeed. So that is what we were trying to do at GreenChar. That is what we're trying to do at Shamiri, and that's what I'm normally trying to do in the endeavors that I am up to, because you are talented, I am talented. I think together we are the solution to our problems.
Sure.
But often we cannot solve these problems, because we just don't have the resources or the opportunities, or are not there where the main important conversations are being made. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that kind of is the inspiration behind the quote.
Oh, that's really true. And just to get yet another perspective, I there's this really different sides that I would love to get your perspective on. And one is on I know, so as you said, we need to come up with the solutions. So we have Kenyans currently and African generally trying to come up with startups. And as you said, I know you raised capital for your GreenChar, the startup that you had, but then I read an article some days ago where people were giving their perspective on raising capital, and it seems that if you have Black founders, like totally African, it's very hard for you to raise money for your startup as compared to when you have whites in your founding committee, or if the founding group has, let's say it's a mix up, or it's actually totally led by a white person. It's easier for you to raise money and than compared to when it's fully Black led. So but this your perspective on this is really, what do you think of I can't call it Black capital, or if you've had an experience of raising money for any organization or anything, what do you think of this, or what's your take on this?
I think what you're saying is 100% true, and it is not an issue that is only specific to it's not specific just to Black founders with white co-founders. It's also a thing if you look at tech. Women struggle to raise money, and I think the idea comes from this concept of homophily, which basically just means that people are more likely to give money to people who look like them, and I think just subconsciously unconsciously we just feel more comfortable with people who look like us or have similar experiences, right? So for example, coming into this conversation, just because you went to Alliance, are more likely to come to this conversation. Sure. It kind of really sets some sort of like a precedent. And so that is a really big challenge. That is the truth of the matter. And I don't think there should be like a debate of conversation to be had, because it's just the truth. Yeah. The question that becomes important to me now is, what do we do about it, right?
Yeah.
And I think the three ways forward. I think the first way, which is kind of the long-term way, as we started having, as most of these African-led organizations begin to scale, we have more like African investors who will be more willing to raise money in African investors. But that's kind of like a long-term thing. So that leads me to the second point, which is what can we do now? And the more I think about this, the more I realize that unfortunately, to be able to raise money from primarily Western white sources, you have to quote unquote speak their language. And that is why, for example, white Western co-founders raise more money than like African co-founders. But what African co-founders can do, unfortunately, is learning how to speak this language, learning how to say and describe the projects they're doing in a manner that makes investors comfortable. But that is also a short-term solution, but that is not ideal. So that brings me to my last thing, which perhaps is the most, I think the second one was a little bit pragmatic, but this one is kind of like a little bit radical, is I think we need a rethink about how we, think about businesses and entrepreneurship and ideas and problems and solutions in this continent. And we need to rethink it in a way that will favor and will privilege, the actual social cultural realities of the ground. Because even if I learn how to speak, the language of my white Western investor, as we say in Kiswahili, vitu ni different kwa ground, things are different on the ground.
True.
Right. And so my proposal, which I think solves this entire problem, is if we can define and normalize defining and thinking about this ventures in a way that we will do on the grassroots. And then that puts the onus on the investors to connect and learn how to do that.
Great, good point. But then, so it's the question of, if you can't beat them, you join them. Is that is that the way you should go about it? So if you can't, if you notice you you treat it differently, so you join the other team, or anyway, it's an interesting thing. But that's, as you say, that's the reality of the matter. Anyway, we hope to maybe get situations better. We hope, of course, with the three points that you've given, I'm sure they're quite they're true, and that's something that can be a solution to this. So you're on to Shamir, which is a project around mental health. Maybe you could say a couple of words, and mostly what I'm interested in is the motivation. Why mental health really, and what is the future for this? What are you doing at Shamir?
Yes, absolutely. The inspiration of the guiding mission of Shamir is a little bit more broad. As I mentioned earlier, our goal or mission, why we exist, is to develop and disseminate evidence-based tools that can help young people actualize life outcomes. And so the most important part of that is evidence-based and tools. So we are in the business of building tools that work. And the first tool that we have built, called Shamiri Project Thrive, is 100% guide geared towards mental health, towards psychosocial functioning, towards well-being, etc. And this is for three really important reasons. So the first reason is we have all this data that shows us that common mental health disorders like depression and anxiety are really common amongst young populations in Kenya. One estimate 1 out of 2 students in Kenya, report, mild to severe depression or anxiety symptoms. And then the second is, if you just look at how important, emotional well-being, psychosocial functioning are tied to holistic life outcomes, it just makes you think that you have to do something about it, because how we are feeling, how we are doing mentally is associated with how we are going to do in class, learning outcomes. It's associated with other general health outcomes. It's associated with post-graduation, outcomes like employment, civic engagement, etc. And then the third reason why we decided to focus on this first is, right now we have a really young population in Kenya. I think our median age is 17, 18, projected to be going lower to even 15 in the coming years. And there's a lot of psychosocial pressure for these young people at a really young age to succeed, which in turn like causes a lot of like emotional problems. But we don't have enough evidence-based mental health treatments. The ones that exist are long, costly, stigmatizing, not culturally relevant. And so we think that there is just like a massive need and a massive opportunity for impact. So that is kind of our focus right now on mental health. And so we have developed this treatment protocol, it's a 4-week treatment protocol. Really, it's simple, stigma-free, scalable, and is done in schools. And we're now disseminating it and scaling it across schools in Kenya. But this is just the beginning point. We're also developing other tools focused on education, civics, innovation. And once we get to a point where we have robustly ascertained that they are evidence-based, then we will seek to also scale them. But the broad idea, once again, comes back to those close to the problem or close to the solution. And I think the problems of our generation and the solutions for these problems are to be found in this next young generation. And so our work at Shamir is to make sure that all of them have a chance to actualize the life outcomes, and want to give them tools to do that so that they can be at the forefront of solving their problems.
Oh, that's great. I will share some links to Shamiri, and then people can really read and try to find. I know there are ways either to support in terms of funding and other issues. So I will share them on my link. But it's really good to see, and I've talked to a couple of guests on this on at Nimegrow, and most of them are into social entrepreneurship and coming up with solutions that are not only fixing a problem with just one person or fixing a problem with just a small number of people, but then people are coming up with projects and coming up into solutions that impact such a large population. I think this is really commendable, and it's really good to see that people are interested in finding solutions, as you said. So at Chamiri, and if I look at it and if I look at the impact that you have and that you're going to have, I think in the long term, it's really a huge impact, and not just a small population. It really affects a huge population of the young age that we have. So it's really commendable. Of course, keep going. Of course, I'm not sure ways we can partner, ways we can try to work together to push these solutions ahead. But of course, I'm open to talking about that. So just to get your final thought, looking back at where you've come from, looking back at you being born in Kenya, and then going to high school, as you said, each stage you've learned something new. And so one very major question, and that's what Nimegrow is about. Would you actually say Nimegrow, and then it's have you really grown? Do you feel like you've shown a change? Do you feel like if you take a screenshot, that's technical way of saying, if it was a machine or a server and you take a screenshot when you were like, let's say 10 years or maybe after primary school, and then taking a current one, do you see a huge change, or are you happy with the change you've done actually?
Like a huge change, like over the last like few years.
Yes.
Like 100%. Like one thing we do a lot. One of our guiding values at Shamiri is just this idea of growth, and it's part of like our mental health, mental health program. And the idea is really simple but really powerful idea, and it's just that we are all always growing.
Yeah.
Every single day we are growing. Our brains can grow forever, our abilities can grow forever. And I now, I think, as a result, think of life less as a journey towards a destination, but more as a constant journey of growth. And in that regard, I will want to just say that I think I have grown a lot as a person. When I was at Alliance, I've grown a lot as person. When I was at Harvard, I've grown a lot as a person. When I was working at GreenChar now, when I'm working at Shamiri, like with the friendships, hobbies, etc. Like every growth moment is just a moment that I am really, happy for. And so to answer your question, like I have grown, and I, continue to grow kind of like every time.
Awesome. That's really great, and I think it's still a question of scaling. It's kind of if this was a market and if this was a financial conversation, I think scaling up is something that everybody looks up to. And if it's a company, you need to grow. You're trying to reach more customers. You're trying to grow your reach. You're trying to grow your revenue streams. So this, I think, as a person, I think we should still emulate 7. It's good to see that looking back, you can say that you've actually grown. But I think
Right, yeah.
That's it for now. Thank you so much. This is what I said at the end of every talk. I wish we had more hours, of course, to talk about different perspectives, to really see the things you're doing, to highlight most of the achievements that you've done. But then I think this is already enough. I will share links to your profile, and people can really read and, of course, just learn your story. So it's really humbling for you to talk to us today. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you.
The pleasure is mine. I'm also honored and humbled. Always great talking. Great work for you doing. Great talking to people. I will just encourage you to, perhaps also consider eventually, putting together a forum to bring everyone you talk to together, because I just think that
Sure.
the pollination of ideas is something that can be really mind blowing.
Sure. Thank you. I'll do. To my listeners, of course, can't wait to host yet another episode. So I hope to see you on the next episode. But otherwise, stay safe.